Picture this: a bustling Philadelphia street, the sirens wailing in the distance, and a young black woman standing on the sidewalk with tears of frustration clinging to her lashes. A stern police officer towers over her, his accusations echoing in the air. By all appearances, she's on the verge of a criminal charge she swears she didn't deserve. The crowd gathers. Tension crackles like static electricity. And then, out of nowhere, an unexpected witness emerges, determined to set the record straight. This is the story of how a malicious frame up-spiraled into a seismic clash of truth, power, and race, all under the unforgiving glare of the law. It began on a humid summer evening in the heart of Philadelphia. The air was thick with the promise of another scorching day ahead, and the roar of city life was relentless car horns, distant shouting, the rumble of the subway far below. Among the neon signs and flickering streetlights, Raquel Williamson clung to her canvas bag as she stepped into the local Wawa convenience store, less than 2 blocks from her tiny apartment. She was exhausted. Working a double shift at a nearby diner, McMurray's had drained her, and she had dropped by for a quick snack before trudging home. In any other city, Raquel might have felt safe enough at this late hour. But this was Philadelphia, where the night had its own kind of energy, a rawness that could bring out the best or worst in people. At 28, Raquel was acutely aware of the city's complexities. She knew how to keep to herself, how to move quickly, how to watch her back in certain neighborhoods. Still, that night, she had a feeling of unease she couldn't quite place. Inside the Wawa, Raquel aimed for the aisle with the water and fruit cups. She brushed past a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a worn bomber jacket, someone she vaguely recognized from the corner near her building. He rummaged nervously through bags of candy before sliding them into his pockets. Raquel pretended not to see. She was neither squeamish nor naive about petty theft. In her neighborhood, it was a grim reality. She tucked her own items under her arm and then added a small container of soup to her basket. By the time Raquel reached the cashier, the tall man was gone. She thought nothing of it until the store manager, a wiry man with bloodshot eyes, burst into loud curses about a robbery. The manager shouted that some thief had snatched a chunk of money from the open cash register. Staff rushed around in confusion. Raquel, startled, watched the chaos and hurriedly paid for her groceries. She left the store, hugging her bag protectively, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She didn't make it far. The store manager came running out, cell phone pressed to his ear, barking details to 911. She heard him breathlessly utter, "Black female suspect, bag." They got away with the money, running toward 9th Street. There was no mention of the tall man, no mention of the bomber jacket, nothing about the suspicious pockets filled with candy. In a flurry of panic, Raquel realized they were describing her. She froze, feet cemented to the pavement. How could she be mistaken for the robber? Her arms trembled as she clutched the plastic bag. With a pounding heart, she fought to remain calm, to do the sensible thing and wait for the authorities to clear this up. I didn't do anything," she managed to stammer. But the manager ranted into his phone as if he couldn't hear her. Within minutes, a siren cut through the muggy air, red and blue lights bouncing off the concrete walls. A police cruiser screeched to a stop. Out stepped 2 officers. One was a stocky, middle-aged man with the nameplate reading Officer Harris, the other a younger recruit whose badge wasn't clearly visible. The older cop wasted no time. He marched straight to Raquel. "You there," he barked. "Hand over your bag. I've done nothing wrong," Raquel replied, desperation creeping into her voice. "I just paid for my items inside. Ask the cashier. Manager says you took off with cash from the register. That true?" he demanded, not waiting for an answer. He snatched Raquel's bag from her grip, rummaging through it. She flinched. She wanted to protest, but her voice caught in her throat. The young officer hovered uncertainly, scanning the chaotic scene. Something about Raquel's terrified eyes must have struck him, but Harris pressed on, rummaging, cursing under his breath. Aside from her groceries, her tips from the diner, which she still needed to deposit, tumbled out of her wallet. It was just shy of $60, mostly wrinkled ones. "Here's your stolen money," Harris declared, holding up the crumpled bills. "That's mine," Raquel exclaimed, her eyes stinging with tears. "I'm a waitress. That's my tip money." "Sure it is," Officer Harris sneered. He whipped out a pair of handcuffs. "MAAM, you're under arrest for suspicion of robbery." "You have the right to remain, wait," Raquel cried. She tried to twist away, but it was no use. The cuffs clicked around her wrists. Two passers-by stopped to see what was going on, but with a hardened glare, Harris convinced them to keep walking. Raquel's mind whirled. She pictured her mother, her younger sister, her hard-earned life. She'd come so far studying part-time at a community college, living on barely any savings, determined to carve out a better future. And now, in the space of 5 minutes, that was at risk of being destroyed by a single false accusation. The manager stared at her with a self-righteous grimace. He insisted he was certain he'd seen her near the cash register, that no one else had been in that part of the store. The younger cop, seemingly uncertain, took a step back. Something in his manner suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. But it was Officer Harris who would make all the difference, and from the look in his eyes, he was determined to solve this case quickly. He nearly shoved Raquel into the back seat of the cruiser, ignoring her protests, ignoring the fear reflected across her face. At the precinct, the process was efficient and brutal. Mugshots, fingerprints, an icy metal bench in a holding cell. Raquel lost track of time, too upset and disoriented to think. She mustered enough composure to use her one phone call to contact her mother, who began sobbing so loudly that Raquel's chest constricted. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Officer Harris filed his incident report with startling speed. It included the manager's claims, the discovery of loose cash in the suspect's bag, and the fact that the suspect matched the store's security camera footage, though no one had bothered to verify those tapes yet. The younger officer, whose name was revealed to be Officer Patel, quietly typed a report of his own, but he received a pointed glare from Harris that said, "Keep it simple." Morning light sliced through the grimy windows by the time Raquel was allowed to see a public defender. She'd never set foot in a police station or a courthouse before, and the thought terrified her. Every time she spoke, it came out shaky and desperate, but she managed to explain that she was innocent, that there had been another person in the store, that someone must have confused them. Her attorney, a weary man named Jacob Larson, seemed sympathetic but non-committal. "We'll need evidence," he said, sighing. "I see this stuff all the time, especially around here. When store managers panic, they point fingers at whoever they think is suspicious. And if an officer's made up their mind, it gets sticky." "I have no criminal record," Raquel pleaded. "Check the surveillance tapes at Wawa. They'll see I didn't do it." Jacob Larson adjusted his glasses. "We'll request the tapes, yes. But if they get lost, or if there's some technical glitch, the manager's testimony and the officer's report might be enough for probable cause. We'll have to fight it in court. And I hate to say it, but the truth doesn't always prevail quickly." Tears welled in Raquel's eyes. She was standing on the brink of a legal fiasco she had no resources to manage. She thought of her mother's small living room on the other side of town, the wallpaper peeling, the bills piling. She thought of her younger sister, Janae, who had finally enrolled at the same community college. Raquel was her role model. The shame threatened to choke her. Jacob patted her shoulder. "I'll do what I can, Miss Williamson. Let's hope that truth comes out sooner rather than later." Word of Raquel's arrest seeped through the community. with surprising speed. Rumors circulated at McMurray's diner. The assistant manager at the diner, a loud but well-meaning woman named Tanya, was furious on Raquel's behalf. She swore she'd raise bail if necessary. But even before Tanya could scrape together the funds, an unexpected phone call reached Larsson's cramped office. The caller introduced herself as Alana Green, a barista who worked at a small cafe across the street from the Wawa. She explained that she'd been out front, taking a break around the time the theft was reported. She had seen a tall man in a bomber jacket dash out of the store, stuffing something into his pockets, and then bolt down 9th Street. She'd never noticed Raquel. In fact, Alana insisted that it was obvious the real thief was a man. She had found it peculiar that he was skulking around the side of the building. Jacob Larsson's pulse quickened. A direct eyewitness who contradicted the store manager's claims could be the break they needed. He immediately arranged to meet Alana. Over coffee and pastries, Alana recounted her memory of that evening with remarkable detail. The time on her phone read 10:57 p.m. The man had a faint scar on his left cheek and a limp in his walk. She described him as tense and looking over his shoulder. He had vanished down an alleyway. Alana didn't think much of it until, later, she heard of the robbery accusation against Raquel. Larsson wasted no time relaying this potential witness to the district attorney's office and the police department. Yet, to his dismay, Officer Harris seemed strangely dismissive. "We've got video from the store, but it's inconclusive," Harris claimed. "We can't confirm any male suspect." And the manager stands by his statement that the suspect was Miss Williamson. She had the money case closed. Larsson pressed for the store's surveillance footage. Mysteriously, the manager claimed the relevant portion of the tape had been lost due to a system malfunction. The portion showing the cash register area was conveniently corrupted. For all that remained, the grainy camera near the soda fountain, you could see Raquel in the store, but not the actual register. The manager was unwavering. He was sure it was her. It looked like it would be Raquel's word, supported by Alana's eyewitness account, against not only the store manager's version, but also that of a veteran police officer. Larsson knew the case was precarious. Police and prosecutors often closed ranks. This was when he realized that more could be at play here. Maybe Officer Harris didn't want to reopen a seemingly solved case, or maybe he harbored biases that made Raquel a convenient suspect. As for the store manager, he might have been covering for his own negligence by pointing the finger at the first suspicious person he saw. Alana Green's willingness to testify, though, offered a glimmer of hope. She was calm, articulate, and unafraid. She told Larsson that she had once been falsely accused herself and refused to let that happen to someone else without speaking up. Larsson filed a motion to introduce Alana's statement into evidence and requested a hearing to challenge the probable cause. If all went well, maybe the charges would be dropped before going to trial. What no one anticipated was how fiercely Officer Harris would defend his version of the story and how that might escalate. The cop had spent over 15 years on the force, mostly in a tough precinct. He had his share of commendations, but also multiple complaints alleging excessive force or discriminatory targeting. Those complaints never stuck, given the complicated politics within the police department. However, behind closed doors, certain colleagues whispered about Harris's questionable methods. Harris was confident he'd done nothing wrong in arresting Raquel. To him, it was a slam dunk, the store manager's accusation, the money in Raquel's bag, her presence at the scene. Perhaps deeper down, he didn't want to consider the possibility that a black woman might be telling the truth. He'd formed an instant judgment. He had a reputation to uphold, so when evidence emerged that contradicted him, he became defensive. The entire situation was threatening to become a black mark on his record, and that wasn't acceptable in his eyes. "You still writing that statement?" He snapped at Officer Patel one afternoon, noticing the younger man hunched over a computer, reviewing old reports. Patel didn't look up. "Yeah, I am. I just need to make sure the details match up." Harris's voice took on an edge. "The details are what we say they are. The manager fingered Williamson. We found the money. End of story." A flicker of discomfort crossed Patel's face, but he nodded and turned back to his screen. There was something about Harris's sudden hostility that bothered him. Patel recalled how, on the night of the arrest, Raquel looked genuinely panicked, begging them to see reason. Deep down, Patel's gut told him something was off, but he didn't want to challenge his senior officer, especially not in a department known to crush rookies who don't fall in line. Days stretched into weeks. Raquel's bail hearing came and went, with the court setting a sum higher than she could afford. She remained in custody, her future hanging by a thread. She shared a cramped cell with two other women also awaiting trial. All she had was a battered copy of a legal aid pamphlet and her own prayers for a merciful resolution. Each call home was fraught with tears, but her mother told her to keep fighting. "We raised you to be strong, Raquel," her mother whispered shakily. "You will get through this." Meanwhile, Alana Green faced her own troubles. She found a threatening note taped to the door of the cafe one morning. "Stay out of things you don't understand." It was scrawled in an unsteady hand, but it was clear the note was about her testimony. She was rattled, worried that the police themselves might be involved, or perhaps someone else who had a stake in protecting the real thief. When Alana reported the note to local authorities, they brushed it off as probably just a prank. Undeterred, she documented everything in a private journal and confided in Larson. Larson was incensed. He suspected that someone wanted to shut Alana up to ensure that no witness surfaced who might contradict the official narrative. Maybe the store manager was truly mistaken, but the bigger threat, he suspected, came from Officer Harris. A few years earlier, a local journalist with the Philadelphia Inquirer had covered allegations of misconduct within the department, specifically implicating Harris in shady deals and lost evidence. The journalist's stories never gained traction, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Now, it seemed Harris was doubling down, refusing to even entertain the idea that Raquel was innocent. He ignored calls from Jacob Larson and insisted that the next step was simply Raquel's trial. Amid the swirl of uncertainty, an unexpected break arrived from the unlikeliest source, a homeless man named Lucky Pete, who lived in an alley near the Wawa. No one knew his real name or how he survived. He was a local fixture, pushing a shopping cart filled with old blankets and rummaging through trash cans for recyclables. He kept mostly to himself, eyes downcast. But Alana, who sometimes handed him leftover bagels, had grown friendly with him. She was telling him about Raquel's situation one afternoon when Lucky Pete mumbled, "Saw that man. He stuffed a wad of cash in his jacket, big old jacket. Ran out of that store like a devil was chasing him." Alana's heart fluttered. "You saw him?" she asked breathlessly. He nodded, looking haunted. "Sat right in my alley. Counted the money. Had to be a couple hundred at least. He tossed the store's receipt tape in the dumpster. I saw it, then took off. Didn't see no woman out there, except that policeman who came by later." Alana, startled, pressed him for details. She asked if he'd be willing to speak to an attorney. Lucky Pete looked anxious. His experiences with law enforcement were rarely pleasant, but Alana assured him that Jacob Larson could help. For once, Lucky Pete would have a chance to do something good that might get him off the streets at least for a while, and maybe receive a small measure of gratitude from the community. After a half-dozen more coaxing conversations, Alana finally persuaded Lucky Pete to meet with Larson. The result was transformative. His testimony, combined with Alana's, painted a vivid picture that matched the scenario Raquel had described from day one. The manager had pinned the crime on the wrong person, while the real culprit vanished into the night. Larson moved swiftly. He filed an additional motion with the court, requesting that the charges be dropped in light of these new statements. The district attorney's office, however, refused to dismiss so easily, citing the store manager's unwavering identification and the missing security footage. They insisted on letting a judge decide. All the while, Officer Harris grew more incensed. He worried that if Raquel was exonerated, questions would inevitably arise about his conduct. Worse, what if someone dug into the store's cameras and realized the footage was never lost but deliberately tampered with? Unbeknownst to most people, Harris had a friend in the store's security division. He'd quietly convinced that friend to misplace the relevant clip. If that arrangement came to light, it could ruin him, so he set out to silence or discredit any new witnesses. Late one night, while Alana was closing her cafe, a police cruiser idled at the curb. Alana's heart pounded when she saw Harris step out, scanning the area with predatory eyes. She locked the cafe door and hurried down the sidewalk. She felt his glare. The next day, she noticed the same cruiser parked near her apartment. A sense of unease trailed her, but she found a renewed determination not to be bullied. If anything, his presence emboldened her to speak up more, to see justice done for Raquel. Raquel's preliminary hearing was scheduled, and the tension soared. The hearing would determine whether there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. If the judge found the prosecution's case lacking, Raquel could walk free. If not, she'd have to endure a drawn-out trial that could end in incarceration. Her mother, sister, and a handful of neighbors crowded the small courtroom. When Raquel entered, dressed in a plain grey jumpsuit, her family murmured words of support. She avoided their eyes, too ashamed to look them in the face. The prosecutor presented the store manager's testimony first. His voice brimmed with certainty. He insisted that Raquel's posture, her suspicious behavior, the money in her bag, it all proved her guilt. Harris took the stand next, detailing how he arrived at the scene, how he found the cash in Raquel's possession, and how she resisted at first. His tone carried an air of authority, and from the judge's pensive expression, it was apparent that the uniform held weight. But then came Larson's cross-examination. He introduced Alana Green, who testified confidently about the tall man she saw. She explained how it made no sense for Raquel to be blamed. Then Lucky Pete took the stand. He appeared in a threadbare jacket, hair unkempt, voice shaking with nerves. But his words were crystal clear. He saw the real thief. He saw him in the alley, counting the money. He never saw Raquel. The prosecutor tried to rattle Lucky Pete, implying that his memory was unreliable due to potential mental health issues or substance abuse. But the homeless man stood firm, repeatedly insisting that the thief was definitely male, wearing a bomber jacket, and that the time matched the robbery. Officer Patel was the last to testify, but his reluctance was palpable. When asked if he believed the manager's story was the only plausible explanation, Patel hesitated. A hush fell over the courtroom. The prosecutor repeated the question, more insistent. Patel swallowed, glancing at Harris, who glowered at him. Caught between loyalty and truth, Patel finally murmured, "I'm not certain, miss. Williamson was the culprit. She was there, but I had doubts." A ripple of gasps coursed through the spectators. The prosecutor paled, and Harris's fists clenched on the witness bench. The entire hearing tilted in that moment. Even the judge sat up straighter. Patel's admission left the prosecution's case wobbly. Then, in a breathtaking twist, footage surfaced from outside the Wawa, captured by a neighboring business's camera. Its owner, a local tailor, had inadvertently filmed the sidewalk in front of the store that night. Jacob Larson had discovered it during his door-to-door search for evidence, but it took time to retrieve and review. The tailor's camera wasn't top of the line, yet it clearly showed Raquel exiting the Wawa with her groceries seconds. after a tall man sprinted away, rummaging in his pocket. Raquel, in fact, emerged just as the manager came barreling out, phone in hand. Larson produced this bombshell video at the hearing. Suddenly, the real suspect's silhouette was visible. Raquel was obviously not that suspect. The manager looked stunned, and Officer Harris's complexion turned stony. The prosecutor hastily asked for a recess, conferring with the store manager, who had begun sweating profusely. When the hearing resumed, the judge, unimpressed by the manager's about-face, admonished him for providing false or misleading testimony. Meanwhile, Harris's unwavering certainty now appeared thoroughly discredited. The judge asked for an explanation about how the in-store footage had conveniently disappeared. The manager stuttered something about system malfunctions, refusing to look at Harris. But what was done was done. The new evidence, combined with testimony from Alana and Lucky Pete, effectively dismantled the case. The judge declared there was insufficient evidence to bind Raquel over for trial. A wave of relief and cheers from her family filled the courtroom. Raquel's tears spilled over as she realized she was free at last, free from the suffocating fear of prison time. Officer Harris left the courtroom in a furious rush, ignoring reporters' questions. A few journalists from local outlets, like the Philadelphia Inquirer, had caught wind of the fiasco. They pressed for an official statement, while the district attorney's office scrambled to minimize damage. In the days that followed, an internal affairs investigation was opened to determine if Harris had knowingly suppressed exculpatory evidence or coerced the store manager into lying. The manager, facing the possibility of perjury charges, cut a deal. He divulged that Harris had strongly advised him to stick to his story to expedite the case. If he cooperated, the manager feared he'd risk Harris's wrath. If he resisted, he worried about the store's relationship with the police department. Harris was known to be vindictive. So, in a moment of panic, the manager clung to the false story. Now it was unraveling. This revelation ignited a media storm. Old allegations about Harris re-emerged. Victims from his previous cases started to come forward, claiming that he'd similarly twisted their words or arranged for questionable losses of footage. Under intense public scrutiny, the police commissioner was forced to suspend Harris without pay pending a full disciplinary hearing. For Raquel, the first taste of freedom felt bittersweet. She had lost her job at McMurray's Diner. Her manager had needed the position filled while she was in custody. She'd accumulated months of rent debt now that she was behind on shifts. Her reputation had taken a beating. Some neighbors whispered about her alleged robbery, unwilling to believe the charges were dropped. The trauma of being jailed and the humiliation of the entire ordeal weighed on her. Still, she breathed easier, knowing she could finally go home. On her release day, Alana Green was waiting outside the courthouse with a bright smile, and Lucky Pete stood off to the side, giving Raquel a thumbs up. Overcome by gratitude, Raquel hugged them both, promising them that she would never forget what they'd done. That single act of compassion, testifying for the truth, had saved her future. Meanwhile, Officer Harris faced the music. The Internal Affairs report painted a damning portrait of his conduct. Not only had he failed to investigate properly, but it appeared he had pressured a witness and manipulated evidence. The department, eager to protect its public image, swiftly distanced itself from Harris. A short, heated hearing followed, and he was fired in disgrace. But karma wasn't done with him. The district attorney's office, stung by the fiasco, referred the matter to state investigators. Rumors flew that Harris might face criminal charges for tampering with evidence and conspiracy to commit perjury. Any illusions he had of an honorable retirement vanished. He lost his pension. He lost respect from peers. Worse yet, a civil lawsuit filed by Raquel's attorney, Jacob Larson, named Harris personally for violating Raquel's civil rights. A local activist group, encouraged by the American Civil Liberties Union ACLU, threw its weight behind Raquel's case, drawing attention to the broader issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. In the end, the real thief, the tall man in the bomber jacket, was caught months later in an unrelated store robbery. He confessed to that night's theft at Wawa, further vindicating Raquel. Harris, jobless and hounded by press, retreated from public view, occasionally issuing statements through his lawyer proclaiming his innocence. But his pleas found little sympathy. And for Raquel Williamson, though the scars of her ordeal would never fully fade, she found solace in the knowledge that justice had, however belatedly, prevailed. She returned to her modest apartment, re-enrolled at her community college, and found part-time work at another diner, a fresh start. Whenever she felt the creeping dread of that jail cell, she'd remind herself that one person's courage could topple the mightiest injustices. First Alana, then Lucky Pete, then Officer Patel's reluctant truth. Each had set off a chain reaction that saved her from ruin. In time, Raquel found peace and even glimpses of happiness. Standing on her stoop late one afternoon, watching the sun paint the Philadelphia skyline in oranges and reds, she felt a swell of gratitude for the second chance she'd been given. Her life was hers again, and no one would take that from her. And there you have it, the roller coaster story of how a single wrongful accusation threatened to destroy an innocent life, until unlikely heroes rose up to expose the real truth. From the Wawa convenience store to the tense courtroom showdown, Raquel's ordeal reminds us all that justice can prevail against even the most intimidating forces. It's a testament to courage, community, and the power of speaking out. If this story moved you, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope persists even in the darkest times, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling content. Every click and comment helps amplify these voices, ensuring that stories like Raquel's aren't silenced. Together, let's shed light on injustice wherever it hides and champion the cause of truth and fairness for all.